The sun had not yet risen fully over the crowded streets of Lagos when Robert's SUV slowed down along a busy road choked with Okada's street hawkers and the usual early morning traffic. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted maize and the persistent cries of traders hoping to make a sale before 8 a.m. Robert, a reserved businessman in his late 40s, was seated at the back of the car reading through financial reports and sipping from a flask of hot Lipton tea. It was just another Tuesday, ordinary, predictable, until it wasn't. As the car dipped slightly into a pothole, Robert glanced up absent-mindedly and that one moment unravelled a memory he didn't know was still alive. There, by the roadside beneath the shade of a tired mango tree, sat a woman. Her wrapper was stained with dust, her blouse torn at the edges. Two small boys' twins perhaps clung to her sides, their faces pale with hunger. Her shoulders sagged from exhaustion, her eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. But there was something about her, something familiar. A face from long ago buried deep within the corridors of his youth. "Driver, I beg, pull over." Robert said, his voice hoarse with something he didn't yet understand. He stepped out, adjusting his agbada carefully as he walked toward the woman. He wasn't sure if it was the outline of her jaw or the way she cradled the boys like a mother shielding her only treasures. But as he drew closer, his heartbeat quickened. "Amaka," he said, barely above a whisper. She flinched and looked up. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to halt. It was indeed her Amaka, the pride of their secondary school class, the girl who once walked like she carried the sun in her stride, the one whose laughter used to echo across the assembly ground. She had once been untouchable, admired, adored, and full of promise. Now she sat in the dust of Lagos, worn by life, clutching two hungry children to her chest. Robert's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen her in decades. They were never close, he was just the quiet boy in the back row, invisible then. But he had admired her from afar. And now there she was, reduced to a shell of who she used to be. "Robert," she asked, slowly, disbelief cracking through her voice. Their past flashed between them, school uniforms, chalkboards, youth. But the present was undeniable. Pain had rewritten Amaka's story. Robert could have walked away. He could have said nothing. But something deep within him stirred. In a city of over 20 million people, fate had drawn him back to a woman forgotten by the world, but not by his heart. And just like that, everything began to change. Before life knocked her to the ground, Amaka had dreams. Not the fragile passing kind, but bold ones, coloured with the promise of youth. In her final year at the girls' secondary school in Enugu, she was known not just for her beauty, but for her brilliance. Teachers praised her essays. Elders in the neighbourhood often said, "That one she go far." Even her mother whispered prayers at night, thanking God for blessing them with a daughter whose name might one day appear on television or printed on book covers. Back then, Amaka believed that love was part of the plan. She met Emeka during a church youth fellowship where he played the keyboard and spoke of building businesses and helping the less privileged. He had charm, ambition, and a smile that made her feel like the center of the universe. He said things like, "You and me, we go build our empire together." And Amaka, like many young girls who had not yet tasted betrayal, believed every word. When she discovered she was pregnant, she was scared, but not broken. She thought Emeka would hold her hand, that they would start the journey together. At first he smiled and called her my queen, but that smile faded quickly. Phone calls became shorter. Messages were left unanswered. He stopped coming to fellowship. One day she stood in front of his gate with her swollen belly, and the gateman told her, "Oga no day come here again." He was gone. Worse still, when she returned home to tell her father, his eyes turned to stone. "You have shamed this family," he spat, slamming the door. Her mother wept behind a curtain torn between love and tradition. And like that, Amaka was no longer a daughter, she was an outcast. With no place to go, she wandered from friend to friend, sleeping on mats, borrowing wrappers, and hoping each sunrise would bring a miracle. The pregnancy grew heavier, and so did her isolation. She fetched water for neighbors, cleaned yards, and sold groundnuts in the market. Every night she whispered to her unborn babies, "We go survive, I promise." When the twins were born, Ifemji and Ebube, they arrived in a borrowed corner of a compound wrapped in threadbare Ankara cloth. There were no naming ceremonies, no proud grandparents, only the cries of new life in the arms of a woman who had lost everything but refused to let go. Amaka raised them on sachet water and leftover rice. She learned which restaurants threw out food at closing time. She tied them to her back while selling plantain on the roadside. Her body grew thin, but her will stayed fierce. For every insult thrown her way, she clutched her babies tighter. She no longer dreamed of big things, just enough Gary for the day, a dry place to sleep a stranger's coin. Yet even in all that, she never stopped whispering to her children, "You will not suffer the way I did. One day, something better will come." She didn't know when or how, but deep inside her heart, even broken, as it was, hope flickered like a stubborn flame. When Robert stepped forward, offering his hand to a woman who once lit up his school days, he didn't expect resistance. But life had carved new instincts into Amaka, ones that told her help was a trap, and kindness was the bait. Her first reaction wasn't gratitude, it was fear. She pulled her children closer, as if Robert might snatch them away. Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "We're fine. Please, just go." But there was nothing fine about her. Robert didn't push. He stood silently watching the way her hands shook when her younger son whimpered. He noticed how she winced at the sound of loud horns, how her eyes darted toward a group of boys passing by, ready to flee if trouble stirred. He crouched down, ignoring the dust that clung to his fine trousers. "Amaka," he said gently, "I know you don't trust me. I know life hasn't given you many reasons to trust anyone, but please, just let me help. For their sake." Her eyes met his for a moment, just long enough for him to see the war inside her. Pride clashed with exhaustion. Pain battled the tiny ember of hope she'd buried long ago. Then, as if on cue, one of the boys whimpered louder, clutching his stomach. Hunger has a way of speaking when words fail. And in that cry, something broke. She nodded. Just once. "Only for tonight," she whispered. Robert didn't smile in triumph. He didn't try to carry her bags or make promises. Instead, he stepped back and gestured quietly toward the SUV. She rose slowly, wobbling under the weight of her boys and fatigue. He didn't reach out, he walked beside her, allowing her dignity to remain intact. When they reached his home, an elegant bungalow tucked away in a quiet part of Surulere Amaka froze at the gate. The well-painted fence, the sweet scent of fried stew, from inside the soft glow of electric light. It felt like another world, a world she no longer belonged to. Inside, the twins sat in awe. A plate of hot jollof rice and fried plantain was placed in front of them, and they didn't wait for permission. Their tiny hands moved fast, stuffing food into mouths too small for such urgency. Amaka didn't touch her plate. She watched them instead, watched as their sunken cheeks lifted with joy. A silent tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it before anyone noticed. Robert sat across the room saying little. No lectures, no questions, just presence. Finally, she lifted her spoon. The food was soft, warm, and real. The kind of food she hadn't tasted since her mother's kitchen. It filled her belly. Yes, but more than that, it awakened something buried under years of struggle, the feeling of being seen. That night, as her children slept on clean beds, and she lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning above her, Amaka whispered into the dark, "Maybe, just maybe, we're safe now." For the first few days in Robert's home, Amaka moved like a shadow present, but silent. She cleaned up after her boys washed their clothes with her own hands, even when the washing machine was available, and refused to sit on the soft couch for too long. To her, comfort felt borrowed, and borrowed things had a way of being taken back. Robert, however, remained patient. He never hovered, he never forced conversation. He simply made space for her, for the boys, for healing. One evening, after the twins had fallen asleep with full stomachs and clean feet, Robert brought her a cup of tea and said, "I think it's time you got back to yourself." Amaka looked at him puzzled. "I mean work," he clarified. "Not to stress you, just something steady, something yours." At first she laughed nervously. What could she possibly do? She hadn't touched a computer in years. Her fingers were used to scrubbing floors and peeling plantains, not typing reports or answering office phones. But Robert saw more than what the world had reduced her to. "There's a small admin role in my company," he said. "I'll train you myself if you're willing." Amaka hesitated, then nodded tentatively. She didn't believe she could, but she trusted that he did. The first week at the office was overwhelming. The air conditioning made her shiver. The keyboard keys felt foreign under her fingers. She fumbled with file names, mixed up print orders, and more than once spilled water on her desk. Eyes followed her, some curious others cold. She heard the whispers. "Is that the woman Ogre brought in?" But Robert never flinched. When a delivery went missing and a customer complained loudly in the reception area, Amaka wanted to run. Instead, she took a deep breath, apologized sincerely, and offered to personally follow up. The client left satisfied. Robert later walked up to her with a quiet nod. "You handled that like a pro," he said. That night, Amaka didn't cry herself to sleep. She slept peacefully, a small smile lingering at the corners of her mouth. Each week she grew bolder. She arrived early, took notes, asked questions, and learned to balance the pressure. She stopped hiding in the bathroom. She started mentoring the new intern. Her clothes changed to still modest but ironed with pride. Her steps became firmer, her voice clearer. At home, the twins flourished. They woke up laughing, returned from school with stories, and hugged Robert tightly every evening. They began to call him Daddy, a name that felt surprisingly natural. Sometimes Amaka would pause while packing their lunch, watching them argue over who got the bigger meat. And in those moments, she felt something sacred, a life rebuilt, not by miracle, but by mercy and effort. She was no longer just surviving. She was returning to herself, slowly, quietly. And this time she wasn't doing it alone. Peace has a way of softening old scars until a voice from the past reminds you just how deep they run. It had been almost a year since Amaka found her footing again. The office no longer felt like enemy territory. The twins had grown, their laughter echoing through the house like music. Robert remained her quiet pillar, never demanding, always present. For the first time in many years, life was stable. And then Emeka returned. At first, it was just murmurs, stray whispers in the marketplace, a cousin's message from Onicha, a mutual friend saying, "That man they ask of you." Amaka ignored them. Ghosts don't return, she told herself. But ghosts don't knock on office doors either. Until he did. It was a Wednesday morning. Robert was in a meeting when the receptionist buzzed. "Sir, someone is here to see Madame Amaka. Says he's family." When Amaka stepped into the hallway and saw him standing there, still with that smooth-talking confidence in his posture, her knees didn't shake. Not this time. But her hands curled into fists. Emeka's eyes scanned her. "You look good," he said, like the years hadn't passed, like he hadn't vanished. "I heard about the boys. I want to see them." Robert arrived before she could respond, calm as ever, but his jaw tight. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm their father," Emeka said with the boldness of someone who thought time erases consequence. "And I have a right to them." The air went still. Robert straightened. "You're the man who left a pregnant woman to starve on the street. I made mistakes," Emeka snapped. "But I'm here now." And then Amaka stepped forward. Her voice was low but steady. "You don't get to come back now and act like nothing happened. You lost that right when you walked away." I'm still their father, Amika insisted, raising his voice. She didn't flinch. No, you are a stranger to them. I am their mother. I fed them when no one else did. I carried them through sickness and hunger. I stayed. Amika turned to Robert, voice laced with bitterness. So you want to replace me? Robert replied simply. I didn't replace you. I showed up when you didn't. Amika's pride dissolved into silence. He saw it then, the strength in Amaka's posture, the quiet protection in Robert's presence, and the life he could no longer claim. With nothing left to say, Amika turned and walked away, not with a bang, but with the weight of loss trailing behind him. When the door closed, Amaka stood still for a moment, not broken, not angry, just free. The past had returned, but this time it didn't have power over her. And that perhaps was the greatest victory of all. Love for Amaka had always come with conditions. It had once whispered promises that vanished with the first sign of struggle. It had left her holding babies in the rain while memories of laughter turned bitter. So when stability returned to her life, she wasn't searching for romance. She was simply learning how to breathe again. But Robert, he was different. He never declared his intentions with flamboyant gestures. There were no roses or midnight serenades. Instead, there were simple things: a warm meal waiting after work, a seat kept for her at the dinner table, and silence when she needed space. Most evenings she would find him reading with the twins. He took his time with them, explaining math problems with patience, answering questions about the stars, listening to their dreams about becoming pilots or engineers. Amaka often stood at the doorway, arms crossed, her heart catching in her chest as she watched. Not because he was doing anything extraordinary, but because he was present. And presence, she had learned, was the rarest form of love. One evening, under the glow of the compound's security light, with the hum of distant generators in the background, Robert finally spoke. Amaka? He said, his voice soft and steady. I've loved you for a long time, but I want you to choose me not because I helped you, not because the boys love me, but because you see me. Amaka's breath caught. Her mind raced. She looked down at her feet, the ground beneath her suddenly feeling too firm. I don't know how to love anymore, she whispered. Robert nodded. That's okay. I'll wait. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I just needed to say it. And he didn't bring it up again. Days passed, then weeks. Robert remained the same steady, respectful kind. He didn't change because of what he'd confessed. He continued to cook Saturday breakfast, walk the boys to school when he could, and leave her quiet notes of encouragement on the fridge. And Amaka began to heal. Not just as a mother or an employee, but as a woman. She began to smile more, to sing while washing dishes, to rest her head on the sofa without fearing what tomorrow might steal. She no longer braced herself every time the door knocked. Her heart, once guarded like a fortress, began to open inch by inch. One quiet Sunday evening, as rain danced lightly on the zinc roof and the boys slept peacefully in the next room, Amaka walked into the sitting room and sat beside Robert. I see you, she said, and I think I'm ready. He didn't rush to hold her. He didn't even speak. He just reached for her hand and held it with the same gentleness that had steadied her since the day they met again. And in that silence, something sacred passed between them. Not loud, not sudden, just true. Amaka never imagined she would return to her father's compound. Not after that night years ago, when his voice roared through the walls and his words slammed the door harder than his hands ever could. You are no longer my daughter, he had said, face tight with pride, shame, and tradition. And just like that, the roof that had sheltered her from childhood became a place she was no longer welcome. But time, like the Harmattan wind, has a way of wearing down even the hardest things. It was Robert who first suggested the visit. They had just finished a quiet dinner, and the boys were playing outside with sticks and bottle caps. Not for them, he said gently. For you, so you can truly be free. Amaka resisted at first. What would she say? What would they say? but a part of her, perhaps the part that still remembered her mother's scent, her father's evening prayers, and the laughter of siblings long grown, knew it was time. So one Saturday morning, dressed modestly in a clean iro and boober with the twins in the back seat and Robert behind the wheel, they made the long drive east, past rust-coloured roads and pepper farms through villages, where old women still sat on wooden stools, peeling yam by hand. When they reached the compound, a marker froze at the gate. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The mango tree still stood tall near the entrance. The faded blue door was still crooked. The same chickens clucked in the backyard. But Amaka was no longer the girl who had once run from that house in shame. Her mother appeared first wearing a wrapper she had tied in the same way for decades. The moment her eyes met Amaka's, they filled with tears. No words, just arms thrown around her daughter, years of pain dissolving in a single embrace. My daughter, she repeated, sobbing into Amaka's shoulder. I prayed for this day. Then slowly her father emerged. Older now, his once broad frame slightly bent his hands, trembling not from age alone, but from regret. Amaka, he said, his voice a whisper. She stood still. I was wrong, he continued. I let pride speak louder than love. Can you find it in your heart to forgive me? For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Amaka nodded, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Yes, Papa, I forgive you. The reunion that followed was not grand, but it was sincere. Her father held the boys and wept. Her mother cooked her favourite ofen sala. The compound that once expelled her now echoed with laughter again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the cashew trees, Robert rose and spoke with quiet authority. I love your daughter, he said, and I wish to marry her with your blessing. The old man looked at Amaka. She nodded, eyes shining. And for the first time in years, her father smiled not with power, but with peace. The past had not been erased, but it had been healed. And Amaka, once cast out in disgrace, had returned not broken, but whole. Amaka had never dreamed of a perfect life. After everything she had been through, perfection seemed like something reserved for storybooks and Sunday sermons. All she had truly longed for was peace, a quiet life, where she could breathe, laugh and sleep without fear. And after the wedding, that was exactly what she found. Not a palace, not a fairy tale, but a home. Their life together was simple yet sacred. Each morning began with the soft rustling of uniforms and the playful arguments of the twins, deciding who would brush their teeth first. The scent of ogi simmering on the stove filled the kitchen, and Robert, still in his wrapper, would help pack the boys' lunch while humming old highlife tunes. Amaka often stood at the doorway of their modest 3-bedroom bungalow in Gabagada, hands on her hips, watching the routine unfold with quiet joy. She no longer lived on alert. Her ears no longer strained for footsteps outside the door. Her body no longer tensed with every knock. She was safe now. Robert remained true to who he had always been, steady, kind and thoughtful. He never tried to overshadow her. Instead, he lifted her voice, involved her in every decision, and reminded her often, "This is your home as much as it is mine." The twins, Ifemji and Ebube, thrived. Their cheeks were fuller now, their laughter louder. They returned from school with dusty feet and stories about class captains and spelling bees, and they called Robert Daddy without hesitation. It came naturally, as if they had always known him. In the evenings, they would all gather in the sitting room some days to watch Super Story, other days to play Ludo on the tiled floor. On Sundays after church, they visited Amaka's mother in the village or shared bowls of hot pepper soup with neighbours. Amaka, once too tired to smile, now found herself giggling at her son's mischief and even teasing Robert when he misplaced his glasses. Of course, there were hard days. The twins occasionally fell sick. Bills arrived too close together, and once in a while old insecurities would rise like distant thunder. But unlike the past, she didn't have to carry those burdens alone. When she felt overwhelmed, Robert would draw her into a quiet embrace and whisper, We'll handle it together. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes it comes in the form of a clean bedsheet, a hot plate of jollof rice, or the sound of a child sleeping peacefully in the next room. Amaka no longer doubted her worth. She didn't feel like a guest in her own life. She had reclaimed her womanhood not by force, but by love. And every now and then, in the stillness of night, as she lay beside the man who had helped rebuild her from dust, she would reach for his hand and whisper, "Thank you for finding me." Because home wasn't a place. It was this rhythm, this laughter, this love. And at last it was hers. Amaka's story is not just about one woman, it is about many women. It is about the single mother who sells roasted corn at the junction, the widow who raises grandchildren on her late husband's pension, the young girl cast out for getting pregnant before marriage. It is a reflection, a mirror held up to society, asking when we see someone fall, do we turn away or reach out? Amaka had every reason to give up. Life dealt her blow after blow, abandonment, shame, rejection, poverty. But she didn't crumble. She bent yes, she cried yes. But she stood again, and in standing she taught us that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's just the decision to keep going. Many in Nigeria know this kind of strength. Our mothers, grandmothers, and aunties bore heavy burdens with dignity. They farmed in the heat, sold in the rain, and raised children with prayers whispered into torn mosquito nets. Amaka carried that same spirit, a woman who refused to be defined by her lowest moment. But even strength gets tired, and that's why her story matters even more. Because when Robert came along, he didn't rescue her like in the movies. He didn't throw money at her problems or expect her to repay him with love. He simply stood beside her. He offered stability. He offered time. He offered space to become herself again. That kind of support, steady, patient, non-judgmental, is rare. It's what real love looks like. And to our elders, this story holds a deeper lesson. It reminds us that redemption is possible at any age, that no matter how long we have lived, there is still room for healing, for joy, for new beginnings. Just as yam can still sprout in dry season with the right rain, a broken life can bloom again, if watered with compassion. Too often we speak of shame and punishment, forgetting grace. Amaka was cast out not by the world, but by those closest to her. Yet when they humbled themselves, she forgave. That too is strength. And in forgiving, she freed herself from the chains of bitterness. Her journey is not one of fantasy, but of quiet victory. She didn't erase the past, she carried it. But it no longer defined her. Instead, it became the soil where something beautiful could grow. So to anyone who feels forgotten, to any woman who thinks her story is over, to every man who wonders if it's too late to do right, Amaka's life whispers this truth: you are not too far gone. Second chances may not arrive with loud celebration. Sometimes they come quietly, like a warm meal, a safe home, or a man who simply stays. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say yes. Yes to love. Yes to healing. Yes to starting again. Because as long as there is breath, there is still hope.